Greetings. I'm here again to try and help you with a summary of Unit 2 this time. Hopefully, if it all works out okay, I'll put this on YouTube and you'll have more than likely the first two sections of the test in one video, and then the second video, the part 2 video, which will talk about the third question. So let's get started. The last video that I showed you describes how we got to the point where we needed to declare our independence against the British, all the different issues that we had with the British. And so as we hopefully understand, in the summer of 1776, the 13 colonies get together and decide that what they need to do is declare their independence again, toward the British. And so at that moment in time, it's a very rare situation. We have a time when people actually have an opportunity to create a government that they actually want. If you stop to think about it, how many people throughout history, human history, have had the opportunity to actually create a government that they think is going to work out real well? Before we talk about the government that they created, I want to talk about the importance of the Enlightenment in regard to the thinking of the movers and shakers, we may call them intelligentsia of the colonies, guys like Jefferson and Adams and Washington and all those guys. What were they thinking about? And the answer to that is quite simple. They had been entrenched in the Enlightenment philosophies of people like Locke, Montesquieu, these sorts of government philosophers that I want to talk about today. So we have a situation where we're going to break away from England. However, we don't know what we're going to do from there. Obviously, if we break away, we have to create a new government. So let's talk a little bit about what the kinds of governments existed at that moment in time, in 1776. Hopefully we understand that most of Western Europe, which is what our kinship is, the major ideology was called the divine right of kings. And basically speaking, the divine right of kings simply means that God has somehow put into power this man or this woman, whether we call it a king or a queen or a czar or an emperor or empress, whatever the name is, God put this individual in power. And this really works out real well in Europe, because if you stop to think about it, how do we put this large mass of people in check? And the answer is we tie it into their religious concepts. So in other words, if we say God put the king into power, then the people who are God-fearing are going to say, okay, well, I guess we have to do whatever it is that he wants us to do. What keeps people in check is that if God puts the king in power, then we have to obey the king. And whatever rules he makes, we're going to have to follow. Because if we disobey the king, then we're also disobeying God. And of course, if we disobey God, we're going to be punished forever in hell. So this fear of eternal damnation, if we disobey the king, keeps people in check. So that's the primary thought process leading up to 1776. However, we need to understand that there are people during the Enlightenment who are starting to question this divine right of kings. Let's talk just a little bit about Thomas Hobbes. Wrote this book called The Leviathan, and the Leviathan basically is a beast that is within all of us. He's basically saying, look, we are part of God's animal kingdom. We do the same things that any other animal will do. There's the savage beast in us that will do anything for our survival. And when we look at the role of government, that role is specifically to create society, to create culture in order to tame that savage beast. So in other words, we create government to tame the savage beast within us. And this is going to result in peace and harmony between all men. Probably the most important philosopher, Enlightenment philosopher, is a guy by the name of John Locke. John Locke wrote, in particular in his second treatise of government, this idea that the divine right of kings really doesn't hold any water. It's not rational. Actually, God created all of us in his image. We are all equal. We are all basically the same. And that we, the people, agree to create a government for self-protection. In other words, let me put it to you this way. John Locke simply says, look, in the hunter-gatherer stages, you have wild apple trees or whatever. We'll use apple trees. So here's the apple tree. Anybody, any creature on earth can go over and take an apple and eat it. God provided that apple for all of us. According to Locke, when an individual goes over to the apple tree and picks the apple off of the apple tree, that apple then becomes his or hers. In other words, through the labor of gaining that apple, they now own the apple. And as long as everybody agrees that the tree belongs to all of us and that we can all pick an apple when we're hungry, everything is fine. However, the advent of agriculture is going to change that drastically, because now my labor, my work is creating cultivated crops. I have a farm. I have domestic animals. I have cultivated crops, as I said. Who is going to protect those things that I worked for from the savage beast that's roaming around wanting to rape and pillage our farms? And the answer to that, of course, is government. In other words, we create government in order to protect our fundamental rights, life, liberty, property. So in other words, we have what Rousseau calls a social contract. We, the people, go into a social contract with the government that we, the people, create. And we simply say, we will allow you to rule over us. And we will give you specific powers to rule over us in exchange for you protecting my rights, protecting my individual rights. So the last person I want to talk about real quickly is this guy by the name of Montesquieu, and he comes into play later on when we create the new Constitution, the Constitution we have today, in what is called the spirit of the law, in which he suggests that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So in other words, what he's saying is, look, all governments have three functions. It has the function of creating laws. It has the function of executing those laws, and it has the function of interpreting those laws. In the case of the King of England, for example, the king has all three of those powers. The king makes the laws, the king executes the laws, and the king interprets the laws. In order to prevent a king or some sort of tyrant, what we need to do is we need to create a government that separates all of those powers. So if we can distribute government power among a number of people, we will not end up with some sort of tyrant. And so that's the basic concepts of the Enlightenment philosophers in regard to government. In other words, the Enlightenment philosophers believed that government is created by the people and for the people, and that we, the people, give government our consent in exchange for protecting our life, our liberty, and our property. So it's important that we have that little bit of information behind us, because when we decide that we are going to break away from England, we now have to begin the thought process of what is it that's going to replace the English government. And I would suggest to you that Thomas Jefferson does a really amazing job at setting the stage for what this new government needs to look like. When they decided at the Second Continental when they decided at the Second Continental Congress to declare our independence, they chose 4 guys to go out and write this Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, of course, being the one that ends up writing the Declaration of Independence. So what I want to do is I want to go to the actual Declaration of Independence, and we're not going to read the entire thing here, but I do want to read this particular paragraph here that starts, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." I would suggest to you that you might want to go online and read the entire thing. It's a brilliant piece of work. As I suggest in my first essay on this next unit test, I suggest that this is an expression of the American mind. In other words, this is what we think America should be. So I'm going to read real quickly some of this, not all of it. I'm going to read real quickly what he put in the second paragraph and how this connects to the Enlightenment. He says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new governments, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness." In other words, people, we go into this new experiment with the ideology that Thomas Jefferson basically borrows or steals, however you want to put it, from the Enlightenment philosophers, particularly John Locke, who I think informed Thomas Jefferson much more than any of them. So what are the basic principles of this American mind? If a foreigner came to me and said, "What is it that Americans think government should be?" I would say that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that we are all endowed, every man, every woman, every child, are all endowed by their Creator, by God, to certain rights that no one can take away from us, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We also believe that government is instituted by men. In other words, we create our own government. And that government derives its power from the consent of the governed. In other words, we, the people, tell the government, yes, we will give you power as long as you protect our life, our liberty, and our pursuit of happiness. We also believe that when the government doesn't do what it's supposed to do, protect these things, then it is the right of the people to throw it out and start a new government, one that does protect its rights. While I'm at this point, I want to just emphasize to you that a lot of people throughout history, throughout American history, have wondered, why is it, why don't we overthrow our government? If we don't like our government, why don't we overthrow it? That's what Jefferson said. We can overthrow it if we don't like it. Some of the people today are very much into, throwing out all the bums in politics. I would suggest to you this, that the way that the founding fathers created this country, we have a revolution every 2 years. Because every 2 years we have an election. This is the people's opportunity to overthrow its government. It is the people's opportunity to say to its representatives, you are not representing my life, my liberty, my happiness. Get out. We're putting somebody else in. So in other words, the election process is in fact a revolution, an opportunity to throw out the government and create a new one. It's an absolutely amazing process. So hopefully we can see, let me go back to the philosophers here. Hopefully we can see where, in particular, John Locke comes into play here in his second treatise on government. By the way, hopefully we know that all of these PowerPoints that I'm going to be using here are on your PowerPoint, on your Blackboard. Weeks 5 through 7. So if you go through weeks 5 through 7, you'll find all of these PowerPoints. Okay, so let's go back down here. Declaration of Independence. Okay, I would suggest to you that the Declaration of Independence is basically the cornerstone document for the United States. It contains the American mind. What does that mean? All men are created equal, that they are all endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It contains the ideas that the government receives its power from the consent of the governed, therefore dismissing the concept of the divine right of kings. It also, if you read through it, we'll see where it contains a list that describes reasons for the separation, such as unwarranted taxation without representation. And it says that we have a right to break away from England and to create our own government. So hopefully that information that I just gave you, and as you can see is right here on this PowerPoint, will help you to answer the first question on Unit 2 essay exam. As always, if you have any questions about any of this, please feel free to contact me, and we'd be more than happy to Zoom with you or to just write back and forth an email or whatever. Okay, so here's the problem. At that moment in time, July of 1776, when that guy takes this big, huge banner and puts it out there for the world to see that we are now breaking away from England and creating our own government. At that moment in time, as I've said, is a very rare moment in time. What is it that we're going to put into place to replace the government that we're throwing out? And that will be much more complicated than meets the eye. And one of the reasons why it's so complicated is because of the colonial past. In the past, we tend to think, oh yeah, 13 original colonies, that they were all together and everybody's happy, blah, blah, blah. That is not true. The 13 colonies grew up very, very differently and had very different concepts, particularly, as I hope you know, the northern colonies had much different concepts than the southern colonies. The eastern elitists had a much different concept than the western farmers, or whatever you want to call them. So this is going to be a difficult task. The other thing I want you to understand is that at this moment in time, probably the key word in the colonies is fear. We fear that if we allow it to happen, we're going to throw out Great Britain and then put in something that is exactly the same. In other words, if we're not careful, we're going to create the same problem that we just rebelled against. And they fought tooth and nail for that not to happen. Another word that we might use during this time is the idea that we can't trust anybody. I guess trust would be the word. We can't trust anybody, that somehow or another somebody was going to take over. Somebody would, there's always this evil plot that was going to take over the colonies, and we're not gonna allow that to happen. We're not going to trust anybody. And so we begin the process of creating a government that basically does not trust anybody. As soon as the Declaration of Independence is signed and the independence is finalized, all of these guys in the Second Continental Congress went home and began to create their own state governments. You need to understand that as far as the mentality of the people in these colonies, now states, is that they are free, independent countries. You need to understand that the word state in 1776 is a totally different concept than the word state that we have today in the United States. The state is the government, it is the country of New York, the country of Virginia, etc. So these people considered themselves citizens of the state that they belong to, and that state is a free and independent country. You need to have that in the back of your mind. So when it comes time to create a central government, you need to have that tucked into your head. These states are not ready to just join in with the other 12 states. We like our own little state, and we'll explain when we look at the let's see, let me get to Articles, yeah. When we get to the Articles of Confederation. So this is going to help you hopefully with the second question. Excuse me. So why did they create a confederation? Why didn't, there were people, we're going to talk about these people later on, but there were people that said, why are we bothering with these little individual states? Just create a country. That's all we need to do. But there is very strong opposition to that. Again, these people liked the idea that I'm a citizen of Virginia. Never considered themselves as being citizens of the United States. The United States didn't exist at this moment in time. So let's take a look at this confederation concept. Why do we need a confederation? they understood that in order to win the war, remember, they understood in 1776 when they signed the Declaration of Independence that this was a declaration of war against Britain. Britain wasn't just going to let us walk away. And so somehow we had to band together. There was no way that the state of New York can fight off the most powerful country in the world at that time, of course, Great Britain. There's no way that the state of Virginia or any other state can do that. So somehow we had to come together. Now the question is, how much togetherness are we going to have? So why don't we have this major, big, just one big government? And the answer is, again, fear of a strong central government. We're not going to break away from one just to create another. As I said, people thought of themselves as citizens of their own state. The concept of the United States is foreign to them. They don't subscribe to, the majority of them anyway, do not subscribe to this concept of a one big country. But they knew that they needed to come together for both military assistance, of course, because we're going to fight the most powerful country in the world, and for economic purposes. How are we going to somehow maintain our economies? You know, obviously we're going to have to work together between the states. So why a confederation? Because basically these people thought that the whole concept of democracy works a lot better when we look at small geographic areas. If we put them all together, it's just going to be too darn big to actually have a democracy. So in their minds, what they're saying is, let's stay these small states where we can control our democracy. Okay. So we know that the Articles of Confederation is the first attempt at creating a government that brings all 13 of these states together. As you wrote about in your homework assignment, there are some serious defects with this government. And again, it is intentional. These 13 states did not want to give their power to some strong central government. So it intentionally creates a very weak central government. So what does this look like? Well, basically, it has one government body. It has a unicameral or one body legislature. That's called the Confederation Congress. Every state sent an equal number of representatives to this Congress. Now they could pass with a 9 to 13, anything over 9, they could pass laws, but anything that changes the Confederation itself, any kind of amendments to how the Confederation runs, had to be unanimous. All 13 states. Imagine how difficult that would be. Okay, very quickly, powers given: settle foreign affairs, war and peace, borrow money, lend money, print money, regulate trade, settle disputes between states, establish postal systems, set common standards for weights and measurements. Now, look, guys, here's the deal. That's all true. However, so could the states. In other words, yeah, the central government is going to make some treaty with some foreign country, but guess what? Each individual state is making their own. Imagine the chaos going on in terms of foreign diplomacy, where you've got Virginia representatives in Great Britain saying, yeah, we're going to do this, and some diplomats from the Articles of Confederation government coming in saying, oh yeah, we're going to do that. What it amounts to is Great Britain's going to say, you know what, this is too confusing. It's just not going to work. We're not going to deal with you. We're not going to sign any treaties with any of you. It is just totally screwy. So obviously that's going to hurt. That's going to hurt the economy of the 13 states. I would suggest to you that the most important problem that this government has is the power that it doesn't have, and that is the power to tax. Think about it, guys. The power to tax is the only way government gets money. What does the government need money for? To do the things that it needs to do, to create armies, for example. How does the Continental Army that is fighting at this point in time, fighting the British, how does it move? How does it feed itself? How does it clothe itself without money? And the answer to that is because of the Articles of Confederation, each the Articles of Confederation government had to go out and borrow money, particularly from the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch. They had to go out and borrow money in order to buy food, clothing, ammunition, all the things needed to fight a war. So this creates two problems. Number one, not only doesn't the government have any money that it can deal with, but because of the Articles of Confederation government process, their rules, they couldn't tax, so they couldn't pay the debts that they owed to to France and Spain and the Netherlands. And of course, now our credit is going to go into the toilet. If we have no income, if the government has no income, it cannot function. Simple as that. Now, what did they do? They said, well, we're just going to ask every state to contribute. So Georgia, how about, we need $1,000 from each colony to buy stuff for George Washington. Poor bastard starving to death at Valley Forge, freezing his butt off. We need to send him food and clothing and all this sort of stuff. So give us $1,000. So Georgia now is saying, we don't have $1,000. You know, all that cotton that we're growing, it's sitting on the dock. We're not selling anything. We have no money. So, yeah, okay, you could say, yeah, we owe you $1,000. Good luck collecting it. Not going to happen. So basically speaking, the central government really has no power at all. Difficult to pass any legislation because we needed to have everybody on board, and everybody just isn't on board. Nobody to enforce or interpret the laws. Here's the other huge issue. The Continental Congress only has one body. It has a legislative branch. In other words, they could make laws. But it has no executive branch, and it has no judicial branch. So it can't enforce the laws that it makes. It cannot interpret the laws that it makes. Now think about this. The state government says, okay, you can only go 65 miles an hour down Route 86. That the state legislature passes that law. You can only go 65 miles an hour. So I know that there is no enforcement of that law. In other words, there are no policemen along Route 86. I know that there are no courts that I would need to go to and pay some sort of fine or something. So am I going to obey the law? Chances are slim that I'm going to do that. So this is a huge problem for this central government, not being able to enforce or interpret the laws that they make. States went about doing their own thing. Again, couldn't tax citizens, couldn't force states to obey treaties, couldn't regulate trade between states, couldn't pay war debts. These are huge problems. And what's happening is that the economy is going into the toilet. If foreign countries will not deal with us because of the chaos that's going on, because we don't know, are we dealing with Virginia or are we dealing with the Continental Congress? Are we dealing with New York rules, Pennsylvania rules? Do we have to know all these different rules, all these different people? Forget about it. It's not worth it. And so basically speaking, the economy shut right down. The other thing you need to think about is that during colonial America, the colonies prospered greatly because of their relationship to England. That whole mercantile system that, we would send raw materials like cotton and tobacco and fur and lumber and all these sorts of things. We would send all that stuff to England. They would make manufactured goods and send them back to us, and we would purchase their manufactured goods. This back and forth created a fantastic economy for all 13 of the colonies. Well, as soon as we cut political ties with England, guess what? We also cut economic ties with England as well. And so we have things that we were sending off to England that are now rotting on docks. We have cotton plantations that have the cotton, just no place to send them to. And because Britain is such a powerful nation, particularly naval power, they just boycotted all of our ports. So that if the French wanted to buy our cotton, they have to go through the British naval forces first. And again, it's just not worth it. So our economy is going into the toilets. Farmers are losing their farms. States individually are passing taxes onto the farmers and the merchants and all these people, and they're saying, where the heck are we going to come up with the money for that? They're going bankrupt. The economy is in a very large downward spiral. So people are losing their farms, and we see things such as the Shays Rebellion, where Shays is a very famous Revolutionary War hero, got a ceremonial sword from General Lafayette for valor and all this sort of stuff, went back to his farm, couldn't pay the taxes, was going to lose his farm, had to sell his ceremonial sword, try to keep the farm going. Eventually, he says, with all the other farmers losing their farms, it's time to march on, that, in that case, Boston, Massachusetts, because this just is not tenable. Matter of fact, there are people who are saying, you know what, maybe we should go back to England. Life was a lot better when we were part of England. And so we are in a very serious we have very serious economic problems. The government that they created is a disaster. And obviously something had to be done about it. And so they create another convention. It's called the Constitutional Convention. The concept behind the Constitutional Convention, it actually wasn't called the Constitutional Convention at the time. It was a convention to try to fix the Articles of Confederation government so that things would work. But very quickly, right off the bat, a guy by the name of James Madison came in with a brand new plan called the Virginia Plan to create a brand new government, one that is totally different than the Articles of Confederation government. It was a fairly common belief among all of the founding fathers, we can call them now, that the Articles of Confederation government was just not fixable, that somehow or another we had to come up with something different. And so, as I said, James Madison comes to this meeting, and in his pocket, he has what is called the Virginia Plan. The Virginia Plan, excuse me, Virginia Plan calls for a government that has all three branches, which obviously big defect in the Articles of Confederation they had to fix. So we're going to create a legislative branch. We're going to create an executive and a judicial branch. The way that the Virginia plan, what the Virginia plan called for is also called the large state plan, where we have two bodies, an upper and a lower house, both of them based on population. So in other words, the more people you have, the more representatives that you send to this legislative branch. Well, that didn't go over well with the smaller states, the less populated states. And New Jersey comes up with its own plan called we call the small state plan. And basically, it's not really coming up with any particular plan. It's basically, let's stick to the one body representation that we had in the Articles of Confederation government. The only, and let's stick to the idea that every state's going to send the same number of representatives to this legislative body. And of course, this is going to cause a big problem. The large states saying, "You're telling me that the state of New York that has 1 million people is going to have the same number of representatives as the state of Rhode Island that has 100,000. That doesn't make any sense at all. It has to be based on population." So we end up with what's called the Great Compromise. Basically, the compromise combines the two plans, and so we will have what is called a bicameral legislation, where we have one house that's based on population, and we're going to call that the House of Representatives, and then another that's based on equal representation for all the states, and that is going to be the Senate. We're going to combine those two houses together, and we call them Congress. The beauty of this plan is that, and as we'll see when we look at the Constitution, is that in order for a bill to be passed into law, it has to go through both of those houses. In other words, the big, huge states could not just bully through a law simply because they have more representatives in Congress. Because once that law that's passed in the House of Representatives, because they have so many people there, once that's passed, it goes to the Senate. And now that small state like Rhode Island has equal say to the big states. So they can put the kibosh on that bill. In order for a bill to pass through Congress, it has to be passed through both houses. So this Great Compromise is really an amazing thing. All right, one of the other issues that is huge among these guys is this, you have on one side groups that thought that power needed to stay in the hands of the state, and you have on the other hand a group that thought that power needed to be transferred to some strong central government. How do we accomplish something that is going to make both those sides happy? And the answer to that is this concept of federalism. And it's very simple, really. In the Bill of Rights, this is something that they fixed in the Bill of Rights. In the Bill of Rights, it simply says that the power, the federal government only has power that is granted to it by the Constitution. In other words, it doesn't have all power. If we do not give you, the federal government, the power, you don't have it. That power remains in the hands of the state and local governments. So let me give you an example. The education of its people is in the hands of state and local governances. We know that, for example, all of the local schools that we have around here, Jamestown High School, or where I taught, Randolph, Frewsburg, wherever, they all have their own rules and regulations about how to run their particular school district, and it's run by their their school board. They're the ones that make the rules. Well, guess what? No other government can tell Randolph High School how to run their school. The President of the United States cannot come down and say to the Board of Education of Randolph Central School, hey, you have to do this. They can't do it. Why? Because they do not have the power. That power lies in the hands of the Randolph Central School Board of Education. Can the federal government say to the state of New York, as they did back in the 1960s, I believe, or 70s, hey, you have to have a 55-mile-an-hour speed zone in all of your roads? The answer to that is no. Why? Because the federal government doesn't have that power. That speed zones on state highways is power given to the state, and so the state can simply say to the federal government, sorry, we're gonna keep it at 65. However, we need to understand that the federal government does exert power. And what happened in the 1970s is they said, okay, fine, you want to keep your speed limit at 65? That's fine. That's your choice. But you know what? We have a lot of money that we are out there spending on helping states to build roads and bridges and things like that. And I don't know, maybe we won't be able to find any money for New York State. So in other words, the federal government can't force states to do things that are in their power, within their power. However, they could obviously exert a tremendous amount of influence on that state. So this is called federalism. The concept of federalism is very, very important. We have layers of power. As we sit here, as you sit here watching this video, you follow, your city laws, you follow your county laws, you follow New York or Pennsylvania laws, you follow federal laws, all of them at the same time. What's the difference? Each one of those governments have different power. Okay, real important. Okay, another big problem that happens during this time is the issue of slavery. Of course, as we hopefully know, slavery is a big issue with the Southerners wanting to keep slavery and the Northerners not wanting to keep slavery, and that becomes very problematic. But they put the issue aside. They punt. We're not going to talk about the issue. The only thing that we're going to talk about is whether or not we can count slaves towards population. The South wanted to count the slaves. The North says, hey, if you don't count them as people, why should we count them? But the compromise was what we call the 3/5 compromise. What we're going to do is we're going to count 3/5 of your slave population towards your representation. And that's going to solve that problem. There's going to be a number of other issues that need to be ironed out. There are guys that think, okay, why are we bothering with some sort of leader that whatever? Why don't we just make a king and that's the end of it? And then there are other people that are saying, no, we want one person. Maybe we'll give them 1 year and then we've got to be reelected. So they come up with, what is the presidency? What is it? What powers does the president have? Which is really, really important. I mean, these people are scared shitless about some single person taking over, becoming a dictator. That is human history, and they don't want it to happen here. So this whole argument about what does this executive look like and what powers do they have is really important. And they iron all of that out, things like a 4-year term of office chosen by the people, but then they come up with something called electoral college, which is something to talk about on another day. Okay, so when this Constitution is ratified, finally everybody gets on board, says, okay, we're going to ratify this Constitution, or we're going to, I'm sorry, we don't, when it is created, we now have to get it ratified. In other words, we have to get out there into the 13 states and say, this is a new government that we think we should have. What do you think? So we had to get the permission of the people to institute this brand new constitution that they created. That immediately devolves into this issue, that it devolves into two groups. One, what we call the anti-federalist, people that are against this new constitution, and those are called the federalist, people that want this new constitution. The anti-federalists, again, very fearful of giving a central government too much power and taking power away from the states. They don't like the idea that that we have this strong central government at all. And lastly, and most importantly for most of us, is that they said it doesn't have a Bill of Rights. How do we protect ourselves against our own government? And of course, that's the only thing out of all of their list that's going to come to fruition. We will, in fact, create a Bill of Rights because of the anti-federalist argument. As you have learned in your last homework assignment, this debate between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists is going to evolve into political parties once the Constitution is ratified and we get into this new government. We create the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, which we'll talk about in another review. So hopefully this helps you with the first and second essays. I will post a second summary for the last essay, in which we talk about who are these founding fathers and what exactly did they create. So hopefully this is helpful for you. If you, as always, if you have any questions, if you have any problems, if you need something to be clarified for you, please contact me. I'd be more than happy to Zoom with you, email, text, whatever way we can. So that's this review. Hopefully you'll tune in to the second for the final essay.